never paid much attention to the little things, the details. Life was too full of noise to catch every whisper of it. And I learned early on that keeping my focus on the big picture got me further than sweating over the small stuff. That was how I built my business, how I climbed from an overworked, underpaid nobody to a man who could afford the kind of life most people only dreamed about. But sometimes the smallest thing, the thing that should have been insignificant, was the thing that ruined everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I found the watch. I had no reason to be in the back seat of my own car. That was where the driver sat when he wasn't behind the wheel, waiting for me or my wife. But I had dropped my phone between the seats, and when I reached down to grab it, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. A watch. Not mine. I picked it up, turning it over in my palm. Expensive. Not just expensive, custom-made, with an engraving on the back. To my brother-in-arms, strength always. MR. I stared at it for a long time, the weight of it pressing into my palm. I didn't know any MR, and I sure as hell didn't have a brother-in-arms. That phrase alone was enough to tell me what I was holding belonged to someone else entirely. Someone who had been in my car. I could have ignored it, could have shoved it into the center console, and let it be one of those mysteries that never got solved. But something in me, something sharp and instinctive, refused to let it go. So I waited. I said nothing to my wife when I got home. I watched her instead. Not in an obvious way, not in the way that would give me away, but I studied her movements, the way her shoulders tensed when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she lingered near her phone a little longer than usual. She had always been beautiful. That was never the issue. It was part of what drew me to her in the first place. But now, as I watched her tuck a strand of perfectly styled hair behind her ear and avoid my gaze, I wondered how much of her beauty was a mask I had never questioned. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the watch still in my pocket like a loaded gun. By morning, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't hard to get answers. I had built my life around knowing how to read people, how to see the angles they thought they were hiding. And as I walked out to my car the next day, gripping the watch in my fist, I was already 10 steps ahead. My driver, Alex, was waiting like he always was, standing near the car with that easy confidence he had always carried. I had hired him a year ago, on my wife's recommendation. Said he was professional, reliable. I never questioned it. Now I was questioning everything. I climbed into the back seat without a word. He closed the door behind me and got into the driver's seat, starting the engine. The usual routine. But today was not usual. I let the silence stretch as we pulled onto the road. Let him settle into the familiar rhythm before I leaned forward and tossed the watch onto the front passenger seat. Lose something. He stiffened. It was slight, just a flicker of tension in his jaw, but I caught it. I always caught it. Where did you find that? He asked, voice even. Too even. Back seat. A pause. Then it's not mine. I smiled, though there was no humor in it. I know. So whose is it? Silence. I watched him grip the steering wheel a little tighter, his knuckles going white. The man who had always been steady, always controlled, was unraveling right in front of me. Stop the car, I said. He hesitated. Now. He pulled over. The second the car was in park, I was out of the back seat, yanking open his door before he could react. He barely had time to scramble before I had him by the collar, dragging him out of the car and slamming him against it. Tell me. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. I saw it in his eyes. By the time I got home, my pulse was still pounding, my hand still twitching with the urge to do something more. But I needed confirmation. I needed the truth in her own words. I was going to get it. I walked into the house like nothing was wrong. Like I hadn't just thrown my driver to the curb and told him to never show his face again. My wife was in the living room, sitting with a glass of wine, her eyes flicking up to meet mine as I stepped inside. Everything okay? She asked. I pulled the watch from my pocket and placed it on the table in front of her. Tell me, I said. Her face didn't change. And that was the moment I knew, without a doubt, that I had been right all along. She looked at the watch the way a stranger might glance at a discarded coin on the sidewalk, vaguely curious, but not invested. It was an act. I knew it. She knew it. But she was still playing the game, still clinging to the ridiculous hope that I'd be stupid enough to believe whatever excuse she was about to spit out. I didn't sit down. I stood there, towering over her, waiting. She lifted her wine glass, took a slow sip, and finally met my eyes. "What did you find that?" she asked. I almost laughed. "Almost. You tell me." A delicate pause, her fingers trailing the rim of the glass. She was buying time, trying to find the right words, the right lie. "That's not mine," she said at last, her voice smooth. "Where did you get it?" I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to keep my temper in check. She was already trying to twist this, to make it seem like I was the one playing detective over nothing. I knew this game. I wasn't playing. "It was in the back seat of the car," I said. "And since I don't know any EMR, I figured you might." A flicker, just a second of hesitation before she caught herself. But I caught it. I stepped closer, leaning down slightly, my hands braced against the armrest of the chair she sat in. "Try again." She tilted her head, eyes sharp. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" That was the moment I lost what little patience I had left. I grabbed the watch off the table and threw it, not at her, but hard enough against the wall that it left a dent before hitting the floor with a metallic clink. Her mask cracked. She flinched, more from the aggression than the watch itself. But she covered it quickly, setting her glass down with a carefully measured motion. "You need to calm down," she said. I let out a harsh laugh. "Calm down." My voice was rising now, and I didn't care. "I found another man's watch in the back seat of our car, and you're telling me to calm down?" She crossed her arms. "You have no proof of anything." There it was. The tactic. Deny. Deflect. Make me the crazy one. I took a step back, staring at her, really staring. How long had this been going on? How many times had she sat across from me, lying straight to my face? "How long?" I asked. She scoffed. "You're being ridiculous." "How long?" She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. "I'm not doing this. If you want to throw a tantrum over a stupid watch, be my guest. But I'm not going to sit here and let you scream at me over nothing." Nothing. I clenched my jaw so tight I thought my teeth might crack. She was good. Too good. I could see the cracks, but she was holding strong, sticking to the script, acting like I was the problem. And maybe that would have worked once upon a time. Maybe I would have swallowed the doubt, convinced myself I was being paranoid. But I wasn't that man anymore. I turned, walking toward the door. I needed air. I needed to think. Her voice stopped me. "You're always like this, you know," she said. Jumping to conclusions, looking for reasons to be angry. "Maybe if you weren't so paranoid all the time, we wouldn't be having this conversation." I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her in my peripheral vision. "You think this is my fault?" She shrugged, her expression calm again. "I think you have a habit of seeing what you want to see." Unbelievable. I opened the door, stepped outside, and slammed it shut behind me. I wasn't done. Not even close. I drove myself that night, speeding through the streets with my mind racing, my hands gripping the wheel too tight. There was one more loose, and I needed to tie up. Alex. I found him where I knew I would. His usual bar, the one I had never cared enough to ask about, but had overheard my wife mention in passing. He was sitting in a booth, a drink in his hand, staring at nothing. I walked straight to him. No hesitation. He saw me coming, his shoulders tensing, but he didn't get up. I slid into the seat across from him, resting my arms on the table. "You have one chance," I said. "Tell me everything, or I will make sure you regret it." He sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. He looked tired. "Good. It wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered. "I swear to God, man, I don't waste my time with excuses." His mouth snapped shut. For a long moment, he just stared at his drink, like he was debating whether to say anything at all. Then, finally, he spoke. "She came on to me," he admitted. I didn't go looking for it. But she wanted more. More. I clenched my fists under the table. "How long?" A beat of silence. Then, 6 months. 6 months. I saw red. I forced myself to breathe, to push back the urge to drag him out of that booth and put him through the wall. I wasn't done yet. "Did she love you?" I asked, my voice flat. His eyes darted up to mine, his lips parting slightly, like he hadn't expected the question. "No," he said. "I don't think so." I nodded. That was all I needed to hear. I stood up, towering over him. "You're fired." He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just nodded, as if he had expected it all along. I turned and walked out, the rage in my chest burning, so hot it felt cold. This wasn't over. Not even close. I drove home in silence. No music, no distractions, just the sound of the tires cutting through the pavement and the weight of 6 months pressing down on me. 6 months. I had been living in my own house like a damn fool, while she was sneaking around with a man I paid to drive her wherever she needed to go. My wife. My money. My damn car. I pulled into the driveway, but didn't get out right away. I just sat there, gripping the wheel, staring at the house I had built, the house where I had thought I was safe. Then I stepped out. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant she was waiting. I found her in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. The moment I walked in, she exhaled sharply, as if she had been holding her breath. "You're back," she said. I didn't answer. I tossed my keys on the dresser, letting them clatter loudly against the wood. She flinched. "Did you talk to him?" she asked. She already knew. I turned slowly to face her. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look sorry. She just looked prepared. Yes. Her jaw tightened. She stood up, smoothing down her dress. "Then you know," she said simply. I scoffed. "Yeah, I know." For the first time, something flickered across her face, something that looked a lot like relief. "I'm glad," she said. I stared at her, trying to understand what I was looking at. A woman who had been caught should have been panicked. Desperate. But she wasn't. She was calm. Too calm. I folded my arms. "And why the hell is that?" She exhaled, shaking her head slightly, as if I was the one missing something obvious. "Because I'm tired, and I don't want to lie anymore." I laughed. A short, humorless sound. "Tired? You're tired? You were screwing my driver in the back seat of my car, and you're the one who's tired?" She lifted her chin. "Yes." My hands clenched into fists. "You don't even have the decency to pretend to be ashamed, do you?" She didn't flinch. "What do you want me to say? That I regret it? That I hate myself? Would that make you feel better?" I took a step closer. "I want the truth." She tilted her head slightly, watching me with eyes that were too damn steady. "The truth," she echoed. I nodded. She inhaled deeply, then let it out. "Fine." Then she dropped the bomb. "I filed for divorce today." I felt my heartbeat slow, then speed up in an instant. "What?" "I already started the paperwork," she said, her voice measured. "I was going to tell you tomorrow, but since we're doing this now," she gestured vaguely between us. I didn't move, didn't blink. She wasn't just leaving. She had been planning to leave. She had known this was coming before I ever found that damn watch. And that meant... I narrowed my eyes. "How long?" She hesitated, then said, "A few weeks." "A few weeks." "You were going to walk away?" I said slowly, letting the realization settle. "And you weren't even going to tell me why." She sighed. "I was going to tell you." "When?" Her lips pressed together. I already knew the answer. Never. I should have expected the next part. I should have known. But when she reached for the nightstand and pulled out a stack of documents, I felt something shift. She held them out to me. "I want half." The words knocked the breath out of my lungs. I stared at her, at the papers, at the audacity. "You want what?" She straightened. "Half of everything. The accounts, the house, the business." I cut her off with a sharp laugh. "The business?" Her face didn't change. "I supported you while you built it." "Supported me?" My voice dropped to something dangerous. "You spent my money. That's not support." She didn't even blink. "That's not how the court will see it." I felt something inside me snap. This wasn't guilt. This wasn't remorse. This was strategy. She had planned this. She had been setting up her escape, and she hadn't even been discreet about it. She wanted to leave and take half of everything I had built with her. And the worst part? She knew she could win. I exhaled slowly. "You really think you're going to get away with this?" Her lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "I know I am." I should have yelled. I should have flipped the table. But instead, I just nodded, because now I understood. This wasn't a woman who had made a mistake. This was a woman who had never been on my side. I took the papers from her hand, flipping through them. "And what happens if I say no?" She lifted a shoulder. "Then we go to court." I looked at her, at the woman I'd spent years of my life with, the woman I had once thought I knew. and I realized I had never known her at all. She wasn't just taking half. She was burning everything down on her way out. And I wasn't about to let her win. I didn't explode. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even raise my voice. That was what she expected. Rage, outbursts, a scene. She wanted a reaction she could use against me later. Something to paint me as the unstable husband, the angry man she had to escape from. So I gave her nothing. I set the papers down on the dresser, smoothing out the pages as if they actually mattered, as if they held any weight in what was about to happen next. I exhaled slowly. You thought this through, huh? She nodded once, her posture firm. I have. I studied her, the woman I had once trusted with my life. How long have you been planning this? She hesitated. That pause was all I needed. I gave a humorless chuckle, shaking my head. Longer than 6 months, I bet. She didn't deny it. The cold realization settled deep in my gut. She hadn't just been cheating. She had been plotting, watching, waiting, lining everything up so that when the time came, she could walk away untouched while I was left with nothing but ashes. I ran a hand through my hair, letting out a slow breath. So let me get this straight. You screw my driver for half a year, decide you're done with me, file for divorce behind my back, and now you want half of everything I built. She lifted her chin. Yes. I stared at her. Really stared. The arrogance. The confidence. She thought she had already won. That's what made it almost funny. Because what she didn't realize, what she would never realize, was that I was never the kind of man who let someone else control the outcome. She thought she was playing the game. She had no idea that I was the game. I didn't touch the papers after that. Didn't bring them up. Didn't argue. Instead, I spent the next few days watching. She thought she had me backed into a corner. That's why she was so smug, so sure of herself. She moved through the house like a queen preparing for her grand exit, casually taking things that weren't hers yet, little things at first. Jewelry, clothes, a few sentimental pieces she probably thought I wouldn't notice were missing. But I noticed everything. I let her think she was winning, let her feel safe. And while she was busy planning her future without me, I was setting up her downfall. It started with the finances. She thought she knew my accounts. She had access to some, sure, but not the ones that mattered, not the ones that held the real money. So while she was packing up her version of our life, I was shifting everything she thought she was entitled to into places she would never be able to touch. By the time she realized the accounts were empty, it would be too late. The next move was trickier. I needed something solid, something that would flip the narrative before she even had a chance to use it against me. And that's when it hit me. Alex. She had already admitted to the affair in so many words. That meant there was proof somewhere. Texts, calls, messages, breadcrumbs leading right back to her. So I waited for the right moment. It came one evening when she left her phone unattended on the kitchen counter, stepping out onto the patio for a call. I moved fast. I didn't need long, just a few seconds to get what I was looking for. And there it was. A hidden folder in her messages, tucked away under a name so generic it was laughable. Inside, hundreds of texts, dates, times, hotel bookings, everything. I took my time forwarding them to myself, making sure every little detail was preserved. Then, I deleted the evidence of what I had done and stepped away just as she re-entered the room. She smiled faintly when she saw me standing there, as if she still believed she had the upper hand. I smiled back. By the time I was done, I had everything I needed. Bank statements proving her sudden cash withdrawals, messages proving the affair, and most importantly, witnesses, because what she didn't know was that Alex had already cracked. He had given me everything. Timestamps, receipts, even a pathetic little text chain where she had tried to convince him that she loved him, that they would start fresh once she got the money. She was trying to play us both, and she had failed spectacularly. So I waited for her to hand me the final piece of the puzzle. And sure enough, 2 nights later, she did. I was in the office when she walked in, holding a glass of wine like she always did when she was about to make some self-righteous speech. She set it down on my desk and crossed her arms. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair. Do we? Her jaw tightened. I'm moving out this weekend. I nodded slowly, as if considering. That's so. Yes. She took a breath. And I expect you to be civil about the settlement. This doesn't have to get messy. I almost laughed. Messy, I repeated. She nodded. If you fight me on this, it'll only make things worse. For both of us. I let that hang in the air for a moment before I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. You know what's funny? I said. She frowned slightly. What? I pulled out my phone and slid it across the desk. You should read these. She hesitated, then picked it up. The moment her eyes hit the screen, her entire face changed. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the phone. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she looked scared. I leaned back again, watching as the color drained from her face. I was going to let you walk away, I said calmly. I was going to let you take what you needed and move on. She swallowed hard. But then I realized something. I continued. You weren't just leaving. You were trying to take me down with you. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I smiled. You lost, I said simply. And for the first time, she knew it. Her hands trembled slightly as she set my phone back on the desk. She tried to compose herself, but it was too late. I had seen the flicker of panic, the tightness in her throat as she swallowed down whatever excuse she was about to spit out. For the first time since this mess started, she was speechless. I took my phone and leaned back in my chair, giving her a long, slow look. Nothing to say. She straightened her shoulders, her mask slipping back into place. You had no right to go through my private messages. I almost laughed. That's what you're mad about? Not that you got caught. Not that you lied. Not that you were planning to rob me blind. No, you're just mad that I figured it out first. She lifted her chin. I'm entitled to half, no matter what. That was the moment I knew she still thought she had a chance. She was clinging to whatever scraps of power she thought she had left. I exhaled slowly. You really don't get it, do you? Her eyes narrowed slightly. I tapped my phone, bringing up the messages, the ones she had so conveniently hidden, the ones that painted a picture so clear even the best divorce attorney in the world wouldn't be able to save her. You lied to me, I said. You betrayed me. But more than that, you were stupid about it. She flinched at that. I held up the phone. I have dates, locations, proof of money transfers. You were paying for his hotels, weren't you? She stayed silent. I tilted my head. Using our money to fund your little affair. I let out a slow, mocking whistle. Courts don't like that, sweetheart. They call that wasteful dissipation of marital assets. A flicker of uncertainty passed across her face. She knew what that meant. I could already see her mind racing, trying to calculate her way out of this. You want to fight me on this? I continued. Go ahead, but I'll bury you in court. I'll make sure you walk away with nothing. Her hands clenched into fists. You wouldn't. I shrugged. Try me. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. She knew I wasn't bluffing. And then, just like that, I saw it. The shift. The moment she realized her plan had fallen apart. She took a step back, her whole demeanor changing. I don't want to fight, she said suddenly, her voice softer. This doesn't have to be ugly. I raised an eyebrow. Now you want to play nice? I made mistakes, she admitted. I know that. I watched her carefully. She was pivoting, adjusting her strategy. If she couldn't take me down, she was going to try and manipulate me into cutting a deal. Let's be reasonable, she continued, inching closer. We don't have to destroy each other. For years, I had loved this woman. I had built a life with her, shared everything I had. And in return, she had plotted my downfall. She wasn't sorry. She was cornered. And the worst part? Even now, she still thought she could manipulate me. I let out a slow, deliberate breath. No, she blinked. No. I stood up, towering over her. No deals. No compromises. You filed for divorce. I picked up the papers and tossed them toward her. Then you'll get exactly what you wanted. She caught them clumsily, her face paling. Only difference. I continued. You won't be walking away with half. You'll be lucky if you walk away with anything. Her breath hitched. You're being vindictive. I smiled coldly. No, I'm just making sure you don't profit off your own stupidity. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she was going to explode. But then, she exhaled sharply, schooling her expression into something eerily calm. This isn't over, she murmured. I smirked. No, it's not. And the best part? I was just getting started. She stood there, gripping the divorce papers, her knuckles turning white. I could see the war happening inside her head, pride battling self-preservation, rage struggling to keep up with the realization that she had lost control. I didn't say anything. I let her sit in it, let her feel the weight of her own failure. Finally, she inhaled sharply, smoothing the pages in her hands. "Fine," she said, her voice flat. "You want to play hardball? I can play too." I tilted my head. "Oh." Her lips curled into something that might have been a smirk if it wasn't so damn desperate. "You think you've won just because you have some texts and a few bank statements?" I raised an eyebrow. "Pretty compelling, don't you think?" She shook her head. "You don't understand how this works. The courts don't care about why a marriage ends. Infidelity doesn't matter in most cases. But assets." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "That's a different story." I folded my arms, waiting. Her confidence was flickering back, like a flame that had been nearly snuffed out but was struggling to reignite. "I know things about your business," she continued, voice smooth now. "Calculated. About how the money moves. About what isn't exactly on the books. You stay up the hair." And for the first time in this whole mess, I laughed. A full, genuine, amused laugh. She frowned, clearly thrown off. "What's so funny?" I shook my head, still chuckling. "You think you have leverage?" Her expression hardened. "I do have leverage." I smiled, slow and sharp. "No, you had leverage. Past tense." Something shifted in her eyes. "You've been sloppy," I said simply. "You spent months planning this exit, months thinking you had me right where you wanted me. But you never once considered what would happen if I saw it coming." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen, pulling up an email I had drafted earlier that day. I turned it toward her. Her eyes scanned the screen, and just like that, the color drained from her face. A forensic audit, requested by me. Signed, submitted, and already in motion. "You were counting on the fact that I'd be too blindsided to act fast," I said. "That I'd be scrambling to react while you control the narrative." She swallowed hard. "But you underestimated me," I continued. "I don't scramble. I don't panic. I plan." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hand shook slightly at her sides. "You want to drag my business into this?" I leaned in slightly. "Go ahead. But when they start digging through your financial records, when they see the money you siphoned out, when they realize how much you've spent," I shrugged. "It won't be me taking the fall." Her breathing had gone uneven. She was realizing, finally, fully, that she had lost. I straightened. "You wanted this to be a war? Congratulations. You lost before you even fired the first shot." She didn't say anything for a long time. Just stood there, her mind racing, trying to find some way out. And then, just like that, her shoulders dropped. Defeat. Acceptance. She exhaled shakily. "What do you want?" Now we were speaking the same language. I walked over to my desk, picked up the divorce paper she had so arrogantly thrown in my face days ago, and flipped to the section about assets. I grabbed a pen, crossed out her half, and wrote down a much smaller number. Then, I slid it across the desk. She hesitated. "If you fight me, you'll lose everything," I said calmly. "If you take this deal, you walk away with something." Her hands twitched slightly at her sides. It killed her to take it. It burned her to know she had come in expecting to destroy me and was now being offered a fraction of what she had planned to steal. But she wasn't stupid. She picked up the pen, signed, and just like that, it was over. She set the pen down with a soft click, her signature scrawled across the bottom of the agreement. The same hand that had once signed her marriage certificate had now signed away her last chance at taking me down. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It was done. She stared at the papers for a long moment, her fingers twitching slightly, as if she wanted to rip them apart, take it all back, undo the trap she had walked into. But there was nothing left to undo. I watched her carefully. "You don't have to look so damn smug," she muttered, finally breaking the silence. I smirked. "I'll try to contain myself." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. She knew she had lost. I stood, gathering the papers and tapping them into a neat stack. "You have 3 days to get your things and leave," I said. "After that, I don't want to see you here again." She lifted her chin slightly, a trace of that old arrogance flashing in her eyes. I'll be gone before then. Good. She turned as if to walk away, then hesitated. You know, she said, her voice quieter now, if you hadn't found that damn watch, things might have gone differently. I tilted my head. No, they wouldn't have, because I would have found out eventually. Maybe not this week, maybe not this month. But a woman like her, one who had spent more time scheming than loving, was bound to slip up. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You're cold, you know that? I smirked. So were you. She had no response for that. She turned and walked toward the door, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She didn't say goodbye. Neither did I. 3 days later, she was gone. She took her designer clothes, her jewelry, the little trinkets she had accumulated over the years, and vanished from my life. The house was quiet. It should have felt empty, but it didn't. It felt lighter. She had tried to break me, to take everything I had built and twist it into her own victory. But she had failed, and now I was free. As I stood in the doorway of my now silent home, I glanced down at my phone, scrolling through my messages until I found the one I was looking for. Alex. I tapped on his contact and typed a simple message. You lost more than just a job. You lost everything. Then I blocked his number. There was nothing left to say. This was over, and I had won.